His vacillation over the weekend from one position to another simply indicates to me that he never established a set of core values that guides his thinking and a moral compass. So that vacillation, for me, is him being tossed back and forth between opinions that surround him. And that's problematic. For a leader, at some point in time, you have to have a set of internal convictions that say, okay, this is what I believe. Regardless, this is what I'm going to support.
Yeah, and Reverend Burns, you know, if it is the case that Donald Trump does not have sort of a moral core, and he's, you know, he's not a church-going man. He has some strange sort of weird ways of quoting the Bible. He says he never asked for forgiveness, that he doesn't pray to God for forgiveness. He looks to himself. And yet, white evangelical voters overwhelmingly support him, 8 out of 10. And he still maintains 65% support among white evangelicals, and this despite only 38% support among everyone else. As a Christian leader, how do you stand behind a man who doesn't seem to have a moral core and who just equated neo-Nazis and white nationalists with the people protesting them?
Well, Joy, for me, and I can only speak about me and my convictions as, first of all, let me just say I honor Dr. A.R. Bernard. He is a general amongst general and a deep friend of mine, and he's been a blessing to my life, wise leader for us, which is obviously why I was extremely saddened to hear that he was resigning and stepping away completely from what we are doing. And for me, I believe, as I shared on your show before, that my support of candidate Donald Trump, now President Donald Trump, lies deeply within my desire to see our faith, the Christian faith, be center of politics again. I believe as long as we have, as Dr. Bernard stated, a seat at the table, that it is our spiritual obligation to be a voice of God to the ear of the President of the United States. And for me, how do I stand behind, even though I believe some of the opinions that you've declared are inaccurate? I don't believe he's supporting neo-Nazi. I don't believe he's supporting white supremacists at all.
What did you think his statement meant?
He has them.
What did you think his statement meant when he said that some of the people who were marching, I mean, they marched on a church. There were people who were clergy who were beaten by these people. Members of your faith were beaten up by these people. When he said that some of them were fine people, what did you think he meant by that?
Well, you know, again, I could just speak to my personal conviction and my support for the movement that I believe God has led. I could never abandon, because I believe God has called me to this. I can never abandon anyone who I believe God has chosen me as a man of God, as a Christian, and as a leader in the body of Christ to speak, thus saith the Lord, to the ear of the President. Just like I could never abandon or resign from any one of my church members who might have done a horrendous crime that everyone has despised. But yet, if that member of mine declared that they needed their spiritual leader to be with them, then I would do that simply because that is my job as a Christian leader. For me, this is not a political movement.
But is your opinion, just to stick with your opinion, do you, in your opinion, was what Donald Trump said about Charlottesville wrong?
I believe that, and let me just answer it like this. You know, I don't have all the information that the president had. If it was me,
just the information you know, that people marched on a church.
I would have personally said stronger in reference to the KKK neo-Nazis, but I don't have all the information. What I do know is this: it is so important. It is so important that even though we despise what the KKK and the neo-Nazis and all the hate groups that hate people based off of the color of their skin, we also have to examine, even though we may stand behind the message of Antifa and what they were and why they were protesting, we have to also look into their methodology as to how they were protesting, and was it inciting violence? Could it have been prevented? What are they blocking this hate group whom we despise their First Amendment right to protest? Again, either we change the Constitution or we stand behind the Constitution, regardless of us hating the message of the neo-Nazis and the KKK. And the President of the United States can't afford to be one-sided. He has to be the president for all people, and that includes covering the Constitution of the United States.
Well, just to be accurate, Antifa were not the only people who were protesting, and civilians cannot block the First Amendment rights of other civilians. It's the government interfering with free speech that would, that would upend the First Amendment. But I want to come back to you, Dr. Bernard on this, and what you make of this. I mean, are evangelicals willing to trade? You talked about the importance of reputation and the importance of your sort of honor. Are evangelicals trading their honor for Supreme Court nominees and anti-abortion policy?
I want to be very careful to say that there's some wonderful people on that evangelical council, people who love God, love country, and I respect them. And this is a decision that I made because I have a set of values, core values that guide my thinking and my decision making. I have a problem with continuing to support anything that's going to endorse this kind of behavior that made it difficult for me as a black person in America to experience the fullness of American life, the American promise. The reality is that whites can easily make decisions about things that I can't because we experience two different realities when it comes to America. All right? When drugs became when drugs went into the black neighborhood, all right, it was a black problem, and we were sent to jail. When drugs hit the white community, it was an American problem, and they were sent to rehab and programs. There's a big difference in the realities that we experience as persons of color and what whites experience in this country.
Yeah, and you know, Pastor Burns, can you name any policies that Donald Trump has put forward that have helped people of color or Christians?
Well, you know, I want to answer Dr. And again, he is a general.
But first, can you answer my question, and then you can do that?
Because of my respect. And absolutely going to come to that, but why it's on my mind, I want to just simply say, for me, again, this is my personal conviction, because the question that many are asking, why am I supporting, why I'm not resigning, especially since Dr. A.R. Bernard, who is a voice among great leaders, has resigned. For me, I just simply believe that the blood of Jesus covers our color. I truly believe that. I believe that until we can stop focusing on the color of our skin and really start as leaders being echoing the voice of Jesus Christ that says that I am first a child of God, and then I am a black man second, or I'm a white person second. I think Dr. Bernard said it in reverse. He said he was a black man first and a Christian second.
I would love...
For me,
hold on, Pastor Burns, we've gone off into a completely different discussion that you've taken us down. I think when you walk into a store and you get followed around, you're pretty much a black man. But I want you to answer my question, if you could, please. Name the policies that Donald Trump has put forward that have helped black people, people of color, or Christians?
Well, I believe, number one, Neil Gorsuch is a person who is a pro-life.
Mm-hmm. Oh, okay.
We're talking about the things that the president ran on. He's a pro-life. He's standing behind pro-marriage. He's pro-Christian. He's pro-faith. That is a huge, matter of fact, that's the #1 reason why Christians and evangelicals supported the president of the United States, is so that we have a Supreme Court justice that believes in the core values that we have as Christian people.
So it's 100% about abortion and gay marriage. That's it. That's all that matters.
Well, no, that's not all that matters, but it was the #1 issue that why Christians
Can you name
and
another
evangelicals
policy
supported
that he has done
the
that has helped people of color?
Well, I think it's also important to understand that the president is making it very clear from his campaign and to now that the economic value of our nation is the key to raising the economic value of African Americans and all Americans in our country. We also understand that black people now, especially black families, is the lowest net worth in America. The net worth of a black family right now is between $5,000 to $8,000. The net worth of a white family is between $93,000 to $113,000.
Right.
There's a huge economic drop in difference between where we are as African Americans and where the rest of America is.
Okay,
That's why the president has, since his presidency, has over 1 million jobs that has been added to our...
Images from the clashes that broke out there in the U.S. state of Virginia. We continue following the breaking news this hour here on CNN. Federal authorities have opened a civil rights investigation into a car attack that took place in the city of Charlottesville, Virginia. One woman died when a car plowed into a crowd of people who were protesting a white nationalist rally. At least 19 people were wounded there, some critically. Police arrested this man. He's 20-year-old James Alex Fields, Jr. He's being held on suspicion of second-degree murder. 3 other people were also arrested in connection with clashes between white supremacists and people who came there to face them down. This rally in Virginia was to protest the planned removal of a statue of a Confederate Civil War general from a city park. Monuments like these bring out strong emotions in many Americans because the Confederate states fought to preserve slavery in the South. Many say that makes the statues symbols of a racist past, of bigotry and hatred, but others say they simply want to preserve their heritage. The issue at hand is especially emotional in the U.S. state of Virginia, and here's some background as to why. Virginia's capital, Richmond, was also the main capital of the secessionist Confederacy. Much of the 4-year U.S. Civil War that began in 1861, it was fought in Virginia, and 500,000 men became casualties within its border. The state was also starved and devastated by the end of that war. Many cities, though, they built statues of Confederate generals, and the battlefields were then preserved as parks. In the meantime, politicians of all stripes are criticizing the U.S. president for his response to what happened in Virginia. CNN White House correspondent Athena Jones has this story for us.
That's right. The president did respond to the violence in Charlottesville earlier today. Here is part of what he had to say.
We condemn in the strongest possible terms this egregious display of hatred, bigotry, and violence on many sides. On many sides. It's been going on for a long time in our country. Not Donald Trump, not Barack Obama. This has been going on for a long, long time. It has no place in America.
And one phrase that you heard from the president just now there is getting a lot of attention, a lot of criticism, I should say, and that is when he said the violence, the hatred, bigotry, and violence on many sides. On many sides. A lot of folks are saying he is equating the neo-Nazis and white supremacists and white nationalists who were demonstrating today and last night with the folks who were counter-demonstrating, protesting the racism and the racial epithets they were espousing. I asked a White House official what the president meant by many sides. I asked several White House officials. This is what one of them said. They said the president was condemning hatred, bigotry, and violence from all sources and all sides. There was violence between protesters and counter-protesters today. So that was the White House doubling down on this idea that both sides are to blame. Another thing that's notable here is that the president talked about bringing the country together, about the need to unite, to straighten out the situation in Charlottesville, to study it, to figure out what's going wrong in this country that allows this sort of thing to happen. Well, a lot of critics on both sides of the aisle are saying that the president himself needs to call out the organizers of these demonstrations by name. Specifically, we're talking about the white nationalists, people who were carrying flags with Nazi emblems, carrying Confederate flags, people who showed up on the University of Virginia's campus last night carrying torches, protesting the removal of a Confederate statue. They note that the president has long criticized people like President Barack Obama for not using phrases like radical Islamic terrorism, arguing how can you fight or defeat this enemy or this idea without naming it. They're calling on the president to condemn white nationalists. And one more thing I want to note, this is a president who has not been shy about criticizing a long list of people, whether it's Democrats like President Barack Obama or his former rival Hillary Clinton, or fellow Republicans like Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell, Senator John McCain, also the former FBI Director James Comey, and the current special counsel Bob Mueller. But what he has not done while president is condemn white nationalists, white supremacy, white nationalism, or Nazis or neo-Nazis. That is why a lot of folks believe that his statement today, the statement here on Saturday, did not go far enough. Back to you.
Athena Jones with the reporting. Now to get the context and voice of David Gergen. David counseled 4 U.S. presidents, both Democrats and Republicans. After David listened to President Trump's reaction to the violence that took place in Virginia, Gergen says that Mr. Trump's lack of condemnation of white supremacists, in fact, lends them legitimacy. Listen.
We do know one thing that's clear. The president, in saying we've had violence and hatred and bigotry on many sides, he repeated that on many sides, did equate. He placed a moral equivalency between the neo-Nazis and the people who showed up today to defend racial justice. He essentially, and in doing that, and by putting an equivalence on, he in effect defended the neo-Nazis. That, in effect, was a defense. You know, everybody does it. Everybody out there is doing it. Everybody has to calm down. I'm sorry. What we have to be very clear about is, a second thing is, yes, there is a First Amendment protection for freedom of assembly, freedom of speech, but it is not an unfettered right. You do not have a right under the First Amendment. The courts have been quite clear about that. You do not have a right to use language that incites violence. And when you have groups marching through Charlottesville, as they were, chanting anti-Semitic slurs, when they are going after blacks, when they're saying take this country back and make it a white-dominated country again, that's an incitement to violence, and that's what we then had. Primary responsibility then for the violence rests with those people who are the neo-Nazis and the white supremacists and the other extremists.
David Gergen there. Also among those attending Saturday's rally was white nationalist, Holocaust denier, and former leader of the Ku Klux Klan, David Duke. He's been a vocal supporter of President Donald Trump during the presidential campaign. CNN's Jake Tapper asked Mr. Trump about David Duke, and Trump initially did not disavow the former KKK leader. Trump blamed it on a bad earpiece, but then subsequently had this to say.
Yes, go ahead.
How do you feel about the recent endorsement from David Duke?
I didn't even know he endorsed me. David Duke endorsed me? Okay. All right. I disavow. Okay? Yes.
The president there clearly disavowing. Duke, though, explained the reasoning for Saturday's alt-right and neo-Nazi rally in Virginia. Listen.
This represents a turning point for the people of this country. We are determined to take our country back. We're going to fulfill the promises of Donald Trump. That's what we believed in. That's why we voted for Donald Trump, because he said he's going to take our country back.
Mr. Trump, after he condemned the rally and urged Americans to come together, Duke then sent a direct tweet to the president saying that Mr. Trump should take a good look in the mirror and remember that it was white Americans who put him in the presidency, not radical leftists. The former lieutenant governor of South Carolina, Andre Bauer, denounced David Duke. He spoke earlier to my colleague Amara Walker, and here's part of that conversation. Bauer beginning by reacting to David Duke's comments that you heard.
David Duke is not any way what I think what this country tries to speak to the world about, welcoming and being tolerant of other people's views. In fact, it's just the opposite, and it's not healthy. I don't know how he's continued to be relevant. I wish y'all wouldn't even cover him, and then it would take a lot of his relevance away. But I hope the president will address that.
Your thoughts on some of the GOP lawmakers who are basically doing what the president didn't do? I mean, for instance, Senator Orrin Hatch tweeting, "We should call evil by its name. My brother didn't give his life fighting Hitler for Nazi ideas to go unchallenged here at home." Senator Ted Cruz also calling it domestic terrorism. Chuck Grassley, what white nationalists are doing in Charlottesville is homegrown terrorism. You have lawmakers, Republican colleagues of the president, who are calling it what it is, yet the president not doing that. How do you explain this huge disconnect between the president of the United States and these GOP senators?
Well, those GOP senators had plenty of time to come up with their message. They're not taking on as many things as the president of the United States is right now. We do have a little situation over North Korea right now.
The president has had many hours to tweet again, hasn't he? I mean, he does like to use Twitter, so why hasn't he retweeted something?
It was sad, unfortunate. Well, I don't know that he said unfortunate.
Right, but he hasn't called out white supremacy.
Well, I hope tomorrow that he does. Again, I was watching Van Jones, a good friend of mine, earlier, and I heard his heart. I heard what he was saying, and I heard what he wanted to hear from our president. And I think our president will clarify some of the things that maybe he didn't get a chance to address today.
All right, Andre Bauer, we appreciate you coming on. Thank you so much for your perspective.
Thank you, Emma.
That interview there taking place earlier in the day, but again, the president always has the ability to follow up with nuance and context. As this question continues, what did he mean by many sides? Certainly many people looking to his Twitter account on that. Still ahead here on Newsroom, U.S. leaders denounce the Unite the Right rally as radical bigotry. I'll discuss race relations in the United States, also with history in mind. Message for the white nationalists at Saturday's rally. Listen.
I have a message to all the white supremacists and the Nazis who came into Charlottesville today. Our message is plain and simple. Go home. You are not wanted in this great Commonwealth. Shame on you. You pretend that you're patriots, but you are anything but a patriot.
In the meantime, Democrats and Republicans are criticizing President Trump for not labeling the protesters what they are, white nationalists.
We condemn in the strongest possible terms this egregious display of hatred, bigotry, and violence on many sides. On many sides. It's been going on for a long time in our country. Not Donald Trump, not Barack Obama. This has been going on for a long, long time.
Joining now to talk more about this situation, we have with us this hour Derek Kayango, the CEO for the Center for Civil and Human Rights right here in Atlanta. It's good to have you, Derek, with us for perspective. So, yes. Given the center there, given the history that I know that you know so very well, I want to talk about the president's words that are getting so much criticism, so much attention right now, many sides. If we could, just ask the director to play a bit of that video showing the protesters as they were facing many of the white supremacists that were there at this rally. You get a sense here of what was happening on the ground. Now, some people will see it one way, others will see it clear as day another way, but here's the question. Many sides, Derek. Putting many sides in the context of history, would many sides be applicable to the 1960s with the civil rights rallies that happened? Many sides.
Many sides, indeed. I think this is a chance for the president to go back and look at this particular statement and figure out a way to address the country. I think if I were him, I would really sit down and put out a whole well-thought-of language piece that explains to the country what is going on. Because what happened, let's look at back of the conversation. Something in terms of voting happened. They voted in Virginia to put down the statue. That's what led to this particular event. So I think that there's a march of freedom towards freedom that is happening all over the country. This has happened in New Orleans. It happened in South Carolina with the flag. It is happening everywhere. We're bringing down these vestiges and bringing up new monuments of courage. So I think that this needs a lot of more thought to it than just one little sentence.
Let's get past the optics of the president's response and get deeper into the nuance and the context of the history here. Because again, you point out in New Orleans, in Georgia and many different southern states, there is this debate about what some people say this is an effort to preserve history.
Correct. And
others say these symbols are symbols of slavery, of bigotry, of hatred. It's a very emotional issue that divides Americans.
It is, and rightfully so, because when you look at what happened in the country during slavery, it's inhumane. And so it's important for us to realize that who is in this fight right now? It's not just African Americans, it's whites, it's Jews. Every one of us that has a thought towards justice is involved in this fight to bring about equality. And not just for African Americans, for everybody. We need gender rights, we need, people need jobs. So we unfortunately are caught in this old struggle when we have real problems that are going on in the country. So I think that this is really important that we actually uproot this particular feeling and go back to the important things at task right now. North Korea, we have jobs issues, Social Security, health care. All these are important discussions. Look at where we are, George. We are talking about what? Old vestiges. How sad.
But again, an old vestige that is a good, big part of American history that has, you know, a deep place for many people. Do you feel that this is an issue that is being addressed as directly as it needs to be right now?
Not really. We need to really think about our leadership, which has so far mentioned powerful words. The Republicans have said some really important things. The Democrats have said some really important things. The president needs to come out and say some very, very important things. But at the end of the day, I ask myself every day, what am I doing as Derek to bring this country to that moral aptitude that we're looking at? Not aptitude, but aptitude. I think all of us in the United States have to really ask ourselves, what are you doing every day to build this country to that place where we all say, this is a country that respects everybody's rights? Because next year, George, is a commemoration of Dr. King's death. 50 years he passed away. So this is important.
Derek Kayongo, the CEO for the Center for Civil and Human Rights here in Atlanta. It's a pleasure to have you with us for the context and perspective. Thank you.
Thank you.
Still ahead here on Newsroom, we continue to watch this developing story out of Charlottesville, Virginia. But after the break, we will look at the escalating tension.
Politics lead now, a source knowledgeable about the day-to-day challenges of National Security Advisor Lieutenant General H.R. McMaster describes to CNN an incredibly difficult work environment for the man who is trying to help President Trump steer this intense international crisis with North Korea. Quote, McMaster knows that he's under attack from all sides in the building, the source told me. It's ferocious, noting that even people within the White House are trying to undermine McMaster and discredit him because he does not share their nationalistic foreign policy views. In the last couple of weeks, however, the campaign against McMaster outside and inside the White House has intensified, and now we're getting a closer look. Some of the rather extreme views McMaster is being pilloried for not sharing. While the president's national security advisor and the National Security Council are trying to provide guidance to President Trump as he attempts to navigate an escalating high-stakes showdown with North Korea, they're also facing attacks from outside the White House and from within the White House. Lieutenant General H.R. McMaster, the national security advisor to the president, has been fending off an information and sometimes disinformation campaign against him by a warring faction vying for power under the same White House roof. Allies of the president's senior strategist Steve Bannon and those of his first fired national security advisor, General Michael Flynn.
It's really a fight for the soul of President Trump as he grapples with, should I be more of a traditional national security president, or should I try and be a foreign policy president in my campaign voice?
Bannon received a special waiver to continue to talk to his former employees at Breitbart News, where he served as chief executive and which he once described as a, quote, platform for the alt-right. It's a website that has launched attack after attack against McMaster in a slew of recent articles. Earlier this week, the Atlantic Council's Digital Forensic Research Lab noted that many of those stories, as well as other attacks against McMaster by fringe websites and figures, including InfoWars, have been pushed on social media using the hashtag #FireMcMaster by a former Breitbart employee who now literally works for the Russian government as an employee of Sputnik News. Fire McMaster has also been pushed by fringe conspiracy theorists with social media presences who have occasionally been granted access to the White House briefing room by the Trump team. Also pushing this propaganda, someone not particularly influential, but extremely noteworthy, Michael Flynn Jr., the son and one-time top aide of the man who used to have McMaster's job, General Michael Flynn. The Digital Forensic Research Lab notes that the hashtag spread partly because of fake or automatic accounts, or bots. They say the campaign against McMaster began in earnest after McMaster ousted the fifth of 5 controversial officials of the NSC who had been brought in by Flynn. Why Rich Higgins, a strategic planning aide who worked on the Trump campaign, was fired by McMaster is subject to debate. Some sources say he and others exemplify McMaster's view that Flynn hired unqualified, substandard staffers. But there's also the matter of this memo Higgins wrote, rife with conspiracy theories reminiscent of those in the fevered corners of the paranoid internet.
If you are on the McMaster side, you do not like this memo because you read it and you say, hey, is he talking about me? Is he talking about someone in leadership who may disagree with the president? Am I that guy?
The memo, obtained by foreignpolicy.com, purports to unravel a bizarre conspiracy theory about a coordinated effort between the establishment, the media, globalists, bankers, Islamists, Black Lives Matter, the ACLU, the Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe, the United Nations, cultural Marxists, and the so-called deep state or permanent government apparatus, all of whom, the memo claims, are banding together to delegitimize and destroy President Trump and prevent him from making America great again. Quote, for this cabal, the memo states, Trump must be destroyed.
To me, it was really a declaration of war on some of the choices for personnel that the president has made. this memo's message essentially was, hey, those that are perhaps generals or those that have been in the process, that's not your brand, that's not who you are.
The memo also compares Trump to Abraham Lincoln, casting Trump's struggle as a battle between good and evil. Quote, in the same way President Lincoln was surrounded by political opposition both inside and outside of his wire, in both overt and covert forms, so too is President Trump, Higgins writes. Had Lincoln failed, so too would have the Republic. Though President Trump, it should be noted, defended McMaster just yesterday.
He's our friend, he's my friend, and he's a very talented man. I like him, and I respect him.
Evidence the campaign's having an effect, while McMaster's trying to give essential national security advice to the president. Well, CNN reached out to the National Security Council at the White House for comment. They said the memo was not an official NSC document. Let's talk about all of the idea that somebody in the National Security Council would write something like this is astounding.
Yeah, well, General Flynn brought in a lot of true believers who believed that not just that some adjustment in foreign policy was necessary, but the whole bipartisan tradition of Bush, Clinton, Obama, Reagan had made horrible mistakes, and we needed this alt-right, nationalist, America First point of view. It was striking watching the North Korea crisis, though. I thought about, I don't know who knows how it's going to play out, and who knows what the real policy is behind Trump's rhetoric. But I thought to myself, if this had happened 6 months ago, 1 month into, 3 weeks into the administration, Michael Flynn would be National Security Advisor, Katie McFarland would be Deputy National Security Advisor, Reince Priebus would be Chief of Staff. Steve Bannon would be at the National Security Council meetings. Remember, he was originally put on, so to speak, the National Security Council. And people like Mr. Higgins, perhaps, or Seb Gorka or others would be probably in the room to discuss policy. Now, whatever you think of Trump's tweets and his occasional statements, John Kelly is the Chief of Staff. Obviously, H.R. McMaster is the National Security Advisor. No Bannon, no Gorka. I feel better about our chances of coming out of this pretty well with this new team, but it has led to this huge reaction. This is not the original group that the Trumpites thought they were going to get advising President Trump.
It's interesting. And Lieutenant General McMaster, he's got a lot on his plate, and I don't imagine that he has a lot of time to devote to whatever he's fending off from Bannon directly, and then also all of Bannon's allies and others attacking him.
Sure.
But the very fact that President Trump gets asked about him, do you still have confidence in H.R. McMaster, says that this is now a thing that McMaster and the president have to deal with.
It's definitely a thing, and I think that there are a lot of people who feel that he is not supportive enough of the president's goals and that he needs to go. But the problem with the memo is that Donald Trump liked the memo, right? So it's like we could say that, well, these are people that are gone now, and we have this new leadership in. But the fact of the matter is, at least reportedly, the memo.
Foreignpolicy.com reported
the memo got to the president.
Not been able to match that
the president saw it. He liked it. He was told that the person who wrote it had been fired and was very angry about it. The memo is insane. I mean, it's truly insane. People should take time to read it to understand that there are actually, as the reporting goes, people still in the White House that believe the things that are in this memo. It even goes off into this sort of alt-right stuff about how, I wrote it down. The memo calls out people who calls out rights based on sex and ethnicity, basically equal rights. So they're taking,
there's a whole thing about political correctness.
They're taking their time to complain about the fact that people want equal rights. People of color and women want equal rights. But also this idea that there's this Marxist cabal. I mean, it's just ridiculous. There are real people who believe, I think correctly, that Washington has a problem and that there are changes that need to happen. But this goes to a different place of Marxist cabal trying to undermine Donald Trump. It just doesn't exist.
And what's disturbing about it is it's not just these fringe players on Twitter or on Facebook who are out there. These are people that, first of all, get retweeted by people in the administration or related to people in the administration. And they obviously, some of these fringe players obviously have White House sources to tell them things. This is part of the president's base that somebody in the White House is nurturing and taking care of.
And probably that will continue, and H.R. McMaster and John Kelly have tough jobs. I'm told that when H.R. McMaster took over, he was really astonished to see the kind of people who were at different levels, pretty serious levels of the National Security Council. He was not, Donald Trump didn't even know him when he took the job. He had to wait some time to develop, his rapport and credibility. And I think he's very pleased now to have John Kelly as Chief of Staff, a presumably a stronger chief of staff, but it's not over. I mean, we shouldn't kid ourselves. I mean, I feel much better about the country with John Kelly and H.R. McMaster there, but Trump, of course, himself has an inclination in this way, to say the least. People in his family do. Others who are close to him. Steve Bannon's still there. So it's not as if the fight for what I think I would regard as kind of a reasonable policy-making process in the Trump presidency is resolved. And the other thing I would say is the chaos remains pretty chaotic. I think Kelly is doing his best. He's been there, just a couple of weeks. But what I'm told, I talked to a couple of people this week who are pretty close to the situation. I mean, it remains a very haphazard system, even though Kelly is doing his best to get it under control.
Well, the chaos is a feature, not a bug. I mean, it's part of the Trump system. How long can General Kelly tolerate a situation where Steve Bannon, and whether maybe maybe they're doing it on their own without him telling them to do it, who knows? But how long can he tolerate a situation where Steve Bannon's allies, the people who used to work for him at Breitbart, are constantly attacking the national security advisor, constantly sending out nasty tweets, one step removed from those Breitbart people? I mean, how long will he tolerate that nonsense?
Well, I mean, I guess that's up to him. I mean, I don't think it's going to stop, right? And to a certain extent, it's because Trump apparently believes in this kind of management, which is pit people against each other and to have this kind of chaos. And so unless the president wants it to stop, it's not going to stop. And so what General Kelly has to decide, and I assume he considered this before he took the job, is whether or not he wants to work in an environment like this, because it's not a secret that this is the environment. And I think that the question now is, will President Trump want to keep McMaster around, or does he want somebody who's going to be operating more like these other people?
Well, and will he empower Kelly to actually get, let's say, normal authority as chief of staff? Seb Gorka, who is on the Flynn-Bannon side of this.
Yeah, he's all over Breitbart editor.
Right, all over TV this week, talking about the North Korea crisis. He's a second-tier White House aide. He's not part of the National Security Council. He hasn't been in the National Security Council meetings, so far as one knows. He hasn't seen the documents, decision memos prepared for the president. It is mind-boggling, as someone who served in the White House, the idea that I would, for example, I was the vice president, chief of staff, so let's say I was kind of similar level, second tier, maybe high second tier, would go onto TV and just pop off my views in the middle of a crisis. I would have been fired in 10 seconds. Jim Baker and Dick Cheney would have been on the phone, Dan Quayle, and I would have been walked out of the White House. That's a good test for Kelly. I mean, we've seen the president today. They seem to have maybe a policy and a strategy on North Korea. Is Seb Gorka going to keep just showing up on TV, popping off for the next few days?
Stick around. Lots more to talk about. I do think it's an open question. The FBI is investigating interference in the U.S. election. Should the FBI also be investigating who is behind this campaign to go after McMaster? We know of at least one person employed by Sputnik News, which is owned by the Russian government, who's doing it. Stay with us. We're going to talk about President Trump's other war of words with Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell. That's next.
CNN political commentator Michael Smerconish hosts Smerconish on CNN Saturday mornings. Michael Smerconish, let me add, we just got this urgent in, and basically in one of those comments, the White House is already playing cleanup when the president was saying now that the White House is saying that the president was being sarcastic in his response to Putin, thanking Putin, right, for the expulsion of the 755 U.S. diplomats. But here's my question to you: is like there are these explosive comments, and there are these defenders saying it's a joke or he was being sarcastic. But to me, that's in this case, it's kind of BS.
Well, I never took him literally. I don't think that anybody believed he was truly expressing gratitude for Russia in their behavior in that instance. What I found more interesting is that while Sarah Huckabee Sanders is saying he was being sarcastic, you've got the NSC spokesperson saying he was being sarcastic. And let's not forget that the downward spiral of our relationship with Russia began with their meddling in the election. I'm paraphrasing that which was just said. And when I saw those two statements, the similarity is that they both say he was being sarcastic. But you don't hear the White House saying, and remember, this was all because of the Russian meddling in the election.
Right. But all right, so let's take the White House at their word that he was being sarcastic. Why is the president being sarcastic when he's talking about something that he hadn't even touched? He hadn't even responded to, the news from Putin from a couple of weeks ago on the 755 U.S. diplomats, and the one and only time we have it's sarcasm?
Brooke, his inconsistency is his great consistency. I know that sounds a bit ridiculous, but the unpredictable nature of what he might say. You think so? I think it's a little too long. But as I was watching your highlight reel, I was reflecting on the many conversations that you and I had in the lead up to the 2016 election where we wondered aloud, and I was often mistaken, in thinking that there would be some pivot. This is just, it's vintage Donald Trump. What you see is what you get. He's the same person who was elected. It's the way he's comported himself. And frankly, it's what makes, some of these press availabilities, rare as they have become, so interesting to watch and see him as he just sort of spitballs on all these different issues.
No, I loved it. Apparently, at one point, Sarah Huckabee Sanders came out with some big cue card saying, a piece of paper saying, one more question, and he's like, forget about that. And he kept talking for 20 minutes. We appreciate that, Mr. President. Let me ask you on North Korea. What are you hearing from your listeners, people you're talking to, about what they think is the U.S.'s best option moving?
Mark Bowden wrote a very lengthy piece for The Atlantic.
I just printed all 27 pages to read on my way to the beach today. All the options.
It's a great read. And you know Mark Bowden of Black Hawk Down fame. He's a real serious journalist. He interviewed all sorts of military leaders and essentially says, look, when all is said and done, there are 4 options. 3 of them are military, ranging from an all-out assault on North Korea to decapitating or assassinating Kim Jong-un. He goes through the pluses and minuses of each of the 4, but it's option number 4 that people are going to find hard to stomach, but this is where he says we're headed, and that is acceptance of a nuclear North Korea. And amazingly, when we polled our audience on this, and thousands of people have voted, they say, yeah, that's probably where it ends up. Now, that sounds like capitulation, but it's the least bad of 4 bad options.
Bad or bad options. Okay. Yep. Okay. I'll report back after I've read this thing. Michael Smerconish, is always a pleasure. We'll see you on TV tomorrow morning. 14 minutes. That is how long the U.S. says the North Korean missile will take to reach Guam. We'll talk about what the president would do if the North fired one. Also, after weeks of silence, the president finally responds to Vladimir Putin's retaliation by, as we were just discussing, thanking him for kicking out diplomats. Again, though, the White House saying, totally being sarcastic. But let's talk with a former State Department official who Trump fired. And after we learned of an FBI raid, it took a couple weeks, but President Trump responded to Vladimir Putin's news of expelling more than 700 U.S. diplomatic staff out of Russia. And President Trump, in his Q&A session with members of the media yesterday, thanked him. And here's another layer to this. Moments ago, the White House said the president was being sarcastic. Here's the clip.
No, I want to thank him because we're trying to cut down on payroll. And as far as I'm concerned, I'm very thankful that he let go of a large number of people because now we have a smaller payroll. There's no real reason for them to go back. So I greatly appreciate the fact that they've been able to cut our payroll in the United States. We'll save a lot of money.
Tom Countryman joins me live from Washington. He is a former State Department official who was fired by President Trump. Tom, welcome back.
Thank you. It's always an honor.
So, White House says this is sarcasm. Heard it for yourself. Do you take the White House at its word?
I take the White House spokesperson at their word. When I first heard the president's thank you message to President Putin yesterday, I thought this is not the most outrageous thing this president has said, but it is one of the most shameful things any American president has said.
Tell me why.
To stand with someone taking hostile action against your government employees, people that you should be relying on to serve your agenda, is simply backwards. Reflects this White House's tendency to demean the service, not just of the State Department, but of a dozen other federal agencies that work in Embassy Moscow, and that will be forced to cut back.
Tom, have you had conversations, I mean, without divulging specifics, have you had conversations with, current staffers at State, and how is this thanking Putin, sarcasm or not, sitting with them?
Well, I haven't had any conversations with people currently employed at State in the last 24 hours. I think the important point is that whether a president speaks with anger, as in the case of North Korea, or speaks with sarcasm, as in this case, those tones of voice have real-world consequences. And in this case, the real-world consequence is to send a message not just to Moscow, but to the rest of the world that he does not trust either the State Department